on here.
At least Woody on.
Hey, awesome. Okay.
Yep. Excellent.
Okay. Well, I'll just keep my.
All right. Want to get started? Cool. All right. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending our presentation today on using Penfield Library Special Collections. My name is Zach Vickery. I am the University Archivist Librarian here at Penfield Library.
And I'm Lyn Blanchfield, and I'm in the history department.
And so today we're going to just talk about ways that classrooms have used archives and special collections, and then also have a concrete example from Lyn about what she's done in her classroom for an assignment, having students learn through the items that we have. And then also we will have an activity for everyone who is attending today to participate in. So I want to give, first of all, an overview of archives and special collections and sort of, talking about what materials do we have. Within archives and special collections, we have three main collecting areas. So the number one is the university archives, which is what I primarily deal with. These are items created by and for SUNY Oswego. So we have things going all the way back to the very beginning and up until the current day. Next, we have our special collections. So this is our manuscripts and local history, really a focus on unpublished materials. It can be things about Oswego and Oswego County, but also we do have some special collections that have significant historical experience in there as well. And then finally, we have our rare books collection. So these are unique texts that you might not be able to find in most places. They could be first editions of books. They could be books that were published, hundreds of years ago. But these are the three main areas that we collect in here in archives and special collections. Focusing a little bit more on the university archives. This is sort of, how I look at it through this lens. So with the university archives, my hope is always to connect students to their community, using what has been created for them to explore about why we exist, and maybe learn a little bit more about what sort of communities or groups that they belong to, or just to understand this place that they may not be familiar with. We have a variety of materials, which can include paper materials, digital materials, photographs, physical objects, metal objects, wooden objects, video recordings, a wide range of things that we'll find in the university archives. And that can be very important as well when sort of using that within the classroom. And then some popular collections that are used here include the Oswegonian student newspapers, the Ontarian yearbooks, the Edward Austin Sheldon collection, which again sort of goes all the way back to the foundation of the university. And it does provide a really great insight into how the Oswego Normal School developed. And then student org collections. So the Gay and Lesbian Association, Black Student Union, Vega, these are examples of student organizations that have decided to donate their materials to archives and special collections, and then make them available for students to learn more about groups that they belong to. With special collections, try to see it through the lens of exploring more about Oswego and Oswego County, which sometimes can get into historical, but also have students learn a little bit more about their surroundings, where they are, and learn through these primary sources. Again, a variety of materials, so a lot of paper-based materials, but also photographs, maps. There are some recordings as well. Popular collections and special collections include the Millard Fillmore papers, 13th President of the United States. We have a very large collection of his, it's like 40,000 pages of letters and correspondences and other materials that have been collected by Fillmore throughout his life. The Marshall family papers, which is another significant family in the Buffalo area that was connected very closely with the Fillmore family. The Port of Oswego records, which I always like to bring up just as a way for students to sort of maybe use collections in a different way. They might be looking at things through the lens of what's coming in and out of the port, what sort of commodities are coming in, what sort of things are being exported. whatnot. The emergency refugee shelter at Fort Ontario. So some of you may know, at Fort Ontario, it served as an emergency refugee shelter during World War II for Holocaust survivors. And so we do have a collection here, and we use that as an entry point for students to learn more about that, in that community lens. And then our oral history collection as well. So recordings that were conducted between the 70s and early 90s, people who would be affiliated with SUNY Oswego, could be students, alum, faculty members, staff members, but then also local community members as well, to sort of learn about, that firsthand experience. And then also with those recordings, many of them have transcripts too, so they can be a little bit more accessible for all of our researchers. And then finally, with rare books, we have publications primarily in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Our oldest book is from the 16th century, and these rare book collections contain a variety of shapes, sizes, and subjects, which have been a part of the classroom experience. It's always fun to kind of go from a little children's Bible, which you'll see in a little bit, to larger books and texts that have some sort of historical significance. And then some popular books in our rare book collection include education, as we were founded as a normal school. We have lots of books on 19th and early 20th century education of children. Pre-19th century books, so we do have a small collection of those sorts of things. If students wanted to interact with something that was made with paper from before a major ramp up of industrialization, they can kind of see the differences between books that were made 500 years ago versus 200 years ago versus current day. And then art, design, and drawing books as well, that do get used from time to time in the collection. So instruction goals for archives and special collections, there's myself, and then we have a digital collections librarian, Marissa Kaiko. And the two of us really take on these sorts of goals when we approach instruction and interactions with archives and special collections. So one, it is introducing archives and special collections and how to contact us. This is a primary thing because many times students do not know that we exist. So we want to inform them about the location of the research room, and then also introduce hours of operation, our website, and where to access digital collections. It's really just more of a how to find these things to start off with, and how and who to contact. Next would be demonstrating knowledge of researcher policies and expectations. This is a unique area, so there are some unique aspects of it all. Number one, we introduce our researcher agreement to students in the classroom, so they kind of know what a researcher is expected to know when they come in, and how that they will interact with the materials. We explain these policies, why that they exist, and how that they are unique to an institution. So our policies are going to be different than, say, Syracuse University, and it's going to be different than University of Buffalo, so and the state archives. So with all of these things, we do also explain to students that what might be here might be different there. We may not require you to show your ID, but another place may, so be prepared for when you come up for that. And then we also, as some sort of understanding this demonstration of this knowledge learned, we include a survey question demonstrating knowledge. So we'll ask a question about name one thing that is not permitted in the research room. Many times that answer is going to be pens or food or drink or something like that, but at least it's a demonstration that students have learned something, and through this understanding of our researcher policies. And then finally, understanding the scope of archives and special collections. So we provide information about what we collect and what we don't collect, and I think that this is helpful for students and faculty as well, so that it's understanding that we don't collect everything, and there are often times in which we do decide to not accept something for the collection, and why that we would do that. And then also understand why items and collections do not circulate. So some of our items that we have are listed in the library catalog. And even though that a student could come down and look at a book explaining as to why that these things are do not circulate, they don't leave our research room, and why that's important. Many times these things are one of a kind, they would be irreplaceable, and so we want to sort of stress that in that process for our instruction. Examples of specific learning outcomes. These are just some examples of things that we've worked on with faculty members in the classroom. So knowing how to search and retrieve information in our digital collections, actually spending a classroom period just providing instruction on how to access the newspapers that are online or the yearbooks. They're on separate platforms. So there's going to be different ways to search for these things, which are different than searching within the library catalog itself. Thinking critically about objects and why something has historical significance. So sometimes within a classroom, we'll spend some time talking about why is it here, and is this still have historical significance? Is this something that is important for researchers? And what can you learn from an object? Three, identify contextual information about primary sources. So really focusing on things like for a student to know who created this object, when was it created, who is the audience of the creation of this? Is this a letter that was a personal letter to someone else? Is this for a wider audience? And also sort of understanding the why. Why was this created, and what ways in which was the communication going on for others to know about this thing. And then finally, sometimes we will also include some specific learning outcomes like how to properly cite an object in archives and special collections. These are unique items. You may not be able to run this through a citation generator to get that quick citation information. So therefore, we'll provide instruction on how to build that citation, how to build that so that it is included in the bibliography or whatever sort of citation style that a student is working with. And then, a couple of examples of previous activities and assignments. On the left side of the screen, we have the rare book activity, and this is an example of our children's Bible. You can kind of see maybe a little bit of scale and how small it is. And this is an activity that Marissa has run in the past where students in small groups will interact with roughly 6 to 8 different books in our rare book collection, and they have a set of questions that they go through for each one. They spend a couple of minutes with the book, and they're looking to see, can they identify the title? Can they identify when it was published? Can they identify who's the audience of this book? And then also, do they consider this to be a rare book? They really dive into that question of, what is a rare book? How do we define it? Because there isn't necessarily always going to be that one very clear definition of that. In the middle is an example of a page from our Transcribe-a-thon and from the Fillmore Papers collection. So professors we've worked with professors to either have students learn about the process of handwriting and maybe even trying to read it and then provide transcriptions. In the last couple of semesters, Marissa has run a Transcribe-a-thon, which would be after class hours, and it's just sort of an informal way for people to come together, read through some of these letters, and then provide some transcriptions to be able to assist with researchers in the future for understanding these objects. On the right side, we have our special collections activity, which was using a scrapbook that we have. And in that sense, it was working with an art and design class to be able to have students select a set number of objects and then sort of group them together in the ways that they want to produce something as sort of a catalog of sorts, and really just provide some description as to why that these things are being grouped together. This particular scrapbook, there were 27 pages of all these different sorts of cards that would have been promoting businesses in the local area. And so while we could provide the digital version for them to use after the class, we also had them interact with the physical so they could kind of see a difference as well. Really learn a little bit more about these materials and also just visit archives and special collections. And then finally, just some previous activities and assignments, working with English 375. They had a focus on LGBTQ and oral histories at Oswego. And so I worked with the class to understand the significance of conducting oral histories and how that they're used in research ways, and then also sort of finding a home for these oral histories that were conducted by the students in the class. to learn more about their community that's here. And then with Technology Education 531, this was a history and philosophy of technology education. They've worked with us to be able to use the materials that we have in their classroom for students to create their projects. So one example being using the Spokesman, a newsletter that was created by a larger organization that is focused on New York State, industrial arts, technology education. And so students can read publications specific to their discipline to be able to create a project for the end of the class. And that's my little spiel to start off with archives and special collections, and I'll turn it over to Lyn.
Okay. Thank you, Zach. So that was a really good introduction to special collections and what kinds of materials are available there, how they're useful for students, how they're useful for your classes. There's a lot of opportunities available for using special collections. Zach and I have been working for several years on assignments for my classes. And I just wanted to give you a little overview of some of the more specific assignments that I've designed with Zach for specific classes. I teach in the history department. I am a medievalist by trade. So I'm one of my great passions is the history of print and the printing world and the printing press. So I have taught Western and World Civilization courses, which is History 100 and History 101. I've taught historical methods, which is a series of 3 classes that are geared towards helping students towards the capstone project, History 298, History 398, and then History 495, which is our capstone. And I've also taught women in history. So these are all courses that I've designed and that I've worked with Zach to create assignments using special collections. So I'm going to give you some examples of assignments that I've given them. And of course, if anyone here wishes to get information about the specific assignments, if you'd like me to share my assignments with you, I'm happy to do so. So for History 101, which used to be the West and the World, it's now a world global class, but when I was teaching it as 101 as a Western and World Civ class, I decided to use some items in special collections. I also used these collections for my History 398 class several years ago, which is also the more advanced historical methods for history majors. And some of the collections that I used for my courses were the letters of Hideo Takamine, and I'll give you more information about him in a moment. Some of you may know his name. He was a SUNY Oswego graduate from the 1800s who came here from Japan to study the Pestalozzi method with Sheldon. I also, with History 398, examined the letters of Millard Fillmore, who, as Zach mentioned, was our 13th president, and we have an entire collection of his papers. And my goal with using both of these collections was to get students to actually touch, as Zach mentioned, touch and handle the documents themselves. I think a lot of students have only seen digital copies of original primary documents, or they've seen them transcribed and translated in many cases into books that are published, and I don't think they always understand how the text or how the primary document exists in its original form. So I thought it was very important, as Zach mentioned, to touch the documents, to see how fragile they are, to get an appreciation of what they are. I also wanted them to read these documents. These are 19th century hands, which are very, very challenging for students and challenging for researchers as well. So I wanted them to get some experience with reading these documents to see how historians do their work. And I also wanted them to transcribe some of these documents so they could actually see the laborious techniques and skill sets and, of course, effort and time that you need to be able to read some of these documents and to realize that not every single document is going to help you in your larger scheme of your project. But it does give you some experience with handling these documents, to respect the documents and to see how they were created in their original format. My goal, of course, with these classes, as well as the Women in History class, which I'll explain later, is to help students engage with the history of our community here. to make them aware that we have a larger history here at SUNY Oswego that is connected to the larger world, whether nationally or internationally. And I think that makes them aware that we are significant in the global scheme of things, and that we touch upon lots of different kinds of international historical events and national historical events that can really help students understand our role within the larger world. So this is Hideo Takamine. This is a photo and some information thanks to Special Collections. And Takamine was born, as it says here, into a samurai family in October. I can't see if I can get rid of that for the moment. There we go. In October 1854, during the Meiji period in Japan, and died in Japan in February 1910. This is connected, his arrival here at SUNY Oswego was connected to not only our own connections with Japan in the 19th century, which is rather complicated, which I won't go into here, but also to Japanese imperialism. The Japanese government sent him to the United States to study the education system here at SUNY Oswego, which was really progressive, this what is called the Pestalozzi method in the 19th century, and bring his knowledge of that educational program back to Japan. He was not the only person to come to the United States to study various kinds of educational techniques. There were many other Japanese citizens, young people who came to the United States to study at various American universities, particularly in the Northeast, to gain more knowledge and education and experience with American educational methods and techniques and theories, so they could bring those back to Japan and improve and actually work with their own educational system. He came to SUNY Oswego from 1875 to 1878, and he interacted extensively with Edward Austin Sheldon, the founder of the school, gaining knowledge in this Pestalozzi method. And he lived in the house of famed educator Herman Kruse. And of course, many of the letters that we have in the Hideo Takamine collection are letters between him and what he called his father, Herman Kruse. So the handwriting there is really challenging for students. He mentions a lot of national events, but also international events. At one point, he mentions an earthquake that happened in Japan, which students found very fascinating. But many times he just mentioned very bland, everyday kind of experiences, which I think also help students connect with him and make them realize that not every single letter is going to have this groundbreaking information. But the more you read about him, the more you read those letters between Kruse and Takamine, the more context you gain, the more information you gain about them as individuals, and the more information you have about who they are and how they contributed to the history of our institution. So I used Takamine's letters. The other letters that I used for my course, this was particularly for History 398, which was the advanced historical methods class for history majors. With the help of Zach, we presented students with some letters that were in the Millard Fillmore collection. And I just randomly chose a letter here. You see on the left-hand side the information about the letter, which is a letter to Millard Fillmore. This is after he was president, in Buffalo, New York, from F. Granger in Auburn, New York, dated September 13th, 1844. This is also courtesy of Special Collections. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you will actually see a copy of the letter. I chose it for this presentation because it's short. I can present it all on one page. You can clearly see the date and the place at the top right-hand corner. It says Auburn, Friday morning, 13 September 44, and it begins, "My dear sir." The handwriting here is really not that challenging, but I chose it for this presentation to give you a sense of what a letter might look like, how the handwriting might look, and how, even though I think this is rather easy to read for a 19th century hand, students found the handwriting of these 19th century writers to be very, very challenging, particularly because sometimes you have overlays of handwriting where this is a rather short and very clear and very distinct letter that's really easy to read. But because paper was expensive and people wanted to cram as much into one letter, sometimes they would write the letter on the front page and then they would turn it 90 degrees and then keep writing on the edges. Sometimes they would flip it over and write on the other side. And because the paper is rather thin in some cases, you can actually, the ink will sometimes bleed through the paper. So you get the other side of the paper, the handwriting bleeding through the first side. So it makes it really challenging to read, but it also teaches students how to engage with these materials and also to respect them because they're very, very delicate in many cases. So for both of these classes, I had students write a reflection paper, not only about the document itself as a primary source document and who the author is, who the audience is, when was it written, what is the context of this, what information did you get out of it, but also to get students to reflect upon their experiences with the document. And I asked them questions about how they handled it, what did they find surprising about it, what did they find challenging about handling the document, what did they learn about how historians do their work. They learned to read and transcribe 19th century handwriting, which I say here on the screen. But in a more historical sense, I also wanted them to learn more about this concept of imperialism when learning about Hideo Takamine. I also wanted them to learn more about 19th century Japan because this was a history class. This was History 101. And I also wanted them to see that there are larger connections between SUNY Oswego and Japan. And a lot of students just are not aware that we had such a huge impact on the educational system of Japan in the 19th century. And for those of you who might know, Hideo Takamine's legacy sort of lived on even after he left SUNY Oswego. He actually is still connected with SUNY Oswego well after he left. He founded a school in Japan, a university which still exists today. And as I understand, and maybe Zach can correct me, we still get materials and information from the heirs and the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, probably great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren at this point. But from the family of Hideo Takamine, they still send us letters. And I believe we actually have a study abroad program there as well, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So I think this really gives students a great opportunity to learn about this connection with Japan. I also think it's great for students to learn about 19th century New York and to see, well, what happens to a president after he's no longer president? What kinds of materials, what kinds of interactions does Fillmore have with the larger community that he lives in? So the next project that I worked with Special Collections on is Women in History. I taught this in the fall of 25. So this is a very recent course. I worked with Zach on this project. And after talking with him, in the previous summer, so that's something to think about. If you're thinking about using special collections, you want to start your investigations and your project early so you have plenty of time to plan. And Zach has plenty of time to plan with you about how to use special collections and what's best to do in terms of pedagogy. But for History 212, this is Women in History. This is like a global history class. I wanted to use SUNY Oswego yearbooks, the Ontarian, and use newspapers, the Oswegonian from the 1970s. The project involved an oral presentation and a short paper. The oral presentation was a group project where students had to present together about what they found in special collections and what kinds of sources they used. And there was also a paper assignment as well. And this is exactly from the presentation. The project, it said you will have a choice of examining 3 issues of the SUNY Oswego yearbook, the Ontarian from the 1970s, or 3 issues of the SUNY Oswego newspaper, the Oswegonian from the 1970s, to examine how and why women and other groups at Oswego in the 1970s engaged with national and international political and social movements. So it was really important for them to choose 3 yearbooks or 3 issues of the newspaper. And instead of clustering them all in one particular time period, I wanted them to spread it out a little bit so they can see change over time. History is all about change over time, and we wanted students to be able to see how things shifted and changed, not only with the creation of the yearbook or the newspaper, but also with the events and the international events and social movements they were examining. And my question to students was, what clubs, events, activities did Oswego students create or engage with that reflect or respond to larger social and political movements? And I gave them several choices. They could look at Title IX, which was created in the 1970s to address inequalities between men and women, the civil rights movement, the protest movement, particularly those against the Vietnam War, healthcare issues. A lot of students in the class decided to focus on women's healthcare, which was a big topic in the 1970s. And students had to choose one movement or one event in order to engage with these materials. So just as an example, this is the front page of the Oswegonian from August 1st, 1974. I chose this randomly, but as it turns out, I guess I did a good job of choosing it because on the front cover, you can see this is a very badly reproduced photo, but this is Germaine Greer, who was a huge women's rights advocate in the 1970s, and she was actually invited to speak at SUNY Oswego in November of 1974. And this issue of the Oswegonian is from August 1st, 1974. And as you can see, they invited Isaac Asimov to present. They brought in William Buckley, and they also brought in Germaine Greer, a really interesting trio of speakers for SUNY Oswego. So we were on the cusp of all these really huge social movements and national and international events. And I thought this was a great way to think about how we're using and what students are looking at. So the assignment objectives was to engage with primary source materials, to learn how to conduct historical research using primary sources, to become more aware of the history of SUNY Oswego through its students, to learn more about the history of women and women's issues in the 1970s. And then, of course, my main goal was to have students connect with Oswego students of the 70s and learn from their experiences, and thus connect more broadly with our campus and its history. And a lot of students actually commented to me afterwards that they had no idea that students from the 70s were so politically and socially engaged in these national and international movements. They were really quite surprised at how vocal they were, how they organized protests and strikes, and were really very instrumental in pushing forward a lot of specific causes that they were really committed to. So I asked them questions for the conclusion of their paper and their oral presentation about what they learned about how to conduct research using the newspapers or yearbooks. This was a really challenging assignment for them. What surprised you about the process of the newspapers or yearbooks? And what did they learn about SUNY Oswego in the 1970s, right? How did Oswego students respond to national and international events? What did they do? How did the yearbooks and the newspapers reflect, or in fact not reflect, what was happening at that particular time? So it was really important for them to see that the newspaper and yearbooks were only a fraction of what was actually happening, and that some things were happening that were not reported in the yearbook and not reported in the newspaper. And it was really important to get that information and for them to learn this. So at this point, we have an activity for you to do that involves looking at an Oswego newspaper. I'm going to give this to Zach. He's going to lead us in this activity.
Thank you, Lynn. So this activity kind of models what we've done in the classroom in the past. What we'll have you all do who are online to examining the Oswegonian is this activity. So there's a website called NewYorkHistoricNewspapers.org. So that's NYSHistoricNewspapers.org. If you also did a search with whatever your preferred search engine is for NYS Historic Newspapers, it should have a webpage that kind of looks like what's on the right-hand side of the screen here. But if you go to that website, what we want you to do is to select Oswego County from either the map. You'll see a large map of the entire state. You can select Oswego County or select counties from the top row on the right. On the top row link. So you'll see at the very top in a red sort of banner area, you'll see search, titles, dates, and then counties. You can select counties and then check Oswego. The next part is going to be select the Oswegonian link located. That'll be on the right side of the screen. So when you either of those choices, you should see a list of all the newspapers that are associated with Oswego County. You should be able to find the Oswegonian in that list. From there, and when you select the Oswegonian link, you'll choose an issue between 1970 and 1979. You'll see a calendar that'll come up, and then you can scroll down to between 1970 and 1979. And all we want you to do is choose one issue. You'll find a month, and then within that month, you'll see all of the issues that were published in that month. So once you are there and you've located an issue, what we want you to do, we have sort of 5 things as part of this activity. So number one, again, thinking through this in the lens of a student of sorts, identify the date of the issue. Can you identify when exactly that this issue was published? Number 2, what is one headline from the first page? This would be hopefully that title page, that first page of the newspaper. Don't have to go too deep into the newspaper, but just identify one headline from the first page. And then what is the article about? Summarize it in about 1 to 2 sentences. Having you sort of read through it, you don't have to spend too much time, but just kind of get an idea of what is, in a very quick summation, what is that article about? And then number 4, who is the audience for the article? Who is this being written for? Think about, is this an article that's being written for students? Is this being written for everyone on campus? Is this being written for one particular group on campus? Sort of think about that. Who is the audience for this article? And then finally, make an argument for why this article is historically important. Sort of after that summarization and who is this for, try to think about, if you were to make an argument of why that this is still relevant today, or what can people learn about what was going on through this article, develop an argument for why that this is important. And so it is 9:36 right now. I'll give you a couple of minutes. It's 9:37, so about like 9:41, 9:42-ish. I'll give you 4 to 5 minutes to sort of think about that, and then we'll get back together in a little bit. And if people would like to share, they can certainly do that. So go ahead and spend some time doing that now. And
if you have trouble, you can certainly contact us through the chat as well if you're having difficulty.
Yeah. Yep. We will be monitoring the chat. right, so we got about 1 minute left. Okay. Let's see if this will work. Yay. So now a little bit of a discussion time here. This would be, in the classroom would be an opportunity for the students to kind of share what sort of articles that they found, and then talk about, what was that summary of the article, and then how could they tell who was written by, try to hopefully identify an author or something like that, and get into do they still think that this is a relevant topic today? Can they make any connections, something like that? So would anyone who's online, would they like to share it all? I can stop sharing the screen here real quick and I can make sure to get back there. Is there anyone? Yeah. If anyone would like to share, please unmute yourself.
I'd be happy to share.
Yeah.
So I found an article from May 12th, 1972. And the article was called Students March on Naval Base. And it was about a group of 750 students and faculty who marched on the naval base here in Oswego in protest of the Vietnam War, and specifically some action that Nixon was putting forth. And that was what the protest was about. And it's funny, you asked a question about why do we feel like this article is still important? I had such an initial response, and then after reading the article, as I kind of read through more of the article, that really changed. And so my initial thought was just oh yeah, this is important because we are, as a student and faculty body, are not really doing things like this, right? The United States right now is engaging in several wars, and there's lots of terrible things going on domestically, and there's ICE detention facilities nearby, and the border patrol nearby, and there's no organization of I can't imagine 750 students going in protest right now, right? And that's fascinating to think that we often think of ourselves as being politically more active now than in the 70s, but that's not the case. But then as I was reading the article, so these students, they went and they were just there for a little while and they did some performative thing, and then most of them went home, and only 15 of them stuck around and camped out there, and ended up having a discussion with the naval officers that were there. And so that kind of changed my thoughts of okay, yeah, we often do these very performative protest things, but what are the next steps? How can we actually take this further? And so that part maybe hasn't changed in 50 years. But then I was really the article is really written. It felt more informative than journalistic, right? Because it started talking about, okay, well, then they met, and then they met with these other university students from other universities, and these are the next steps that are going to happen. Here are the dates. And then there's a direct quote. He says something like, we need support in all these ways, transportation, money, whatever. And that's the author of the article writing that. So it seems much more direct engagement and part of the newspaper in these actions, rather than reporting on kind of more detached, this is what happened.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Woody. And I think that's often what students have also reported in classes too.
Yeah, they did in my Women in History class. They also said basically what you said, that they were surprised at how active our students were in the 1970s. And I have to say, you mentioned the author of the piece, and sometimes students noticed there was no author. Sometimes it was just the editorial board. And fortunately for me, in my Women in History class, I had an editor from the Oswegonian in my class.
Yeah, yeah.
So she was awesome. She was just a great resource. And I said, is this common that an editorial in the newspaper would not have an author? And she said, yes, it would just be the entire board would be the author of the piece. And that was really surprising to me because I mean, I read the newspaper all the time, but it didn't really occur to me. And it was a good lesson for students as well. So thank you for sharing that. That's a really interesting observation about that.
And sometimes, especially with something like this, where it can provide an opportunity, depending on what the professor would like to have the class do. Example of, this is what was from the Oswegonian. Can you find an example of the it being reported on in a different way? Maybe the other local newspaper, the Palladium Times, or can you find an additional source that talks about this? And why not? If you can't, what sort of things may not have led to this being covered beyond students, that will work in the Oswegonian?
Right.
So,
and they can connect it to larger national events and larger international events. So you might have students say, take a look at the same date, but look in the New York Times.
Yeah.
Look at the Washington Post. Maybe look at another newspaper that's outside the country, maybe Canada,
Yep.
and see if there are other similar kinds of protests going on at the same time.
Yep.
So thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else who wants to share their newspaper?
I can share if no one in the room is ready.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, so I just picked an issue at random. Is from October 4th, 1979. And what was really interesting was the front page was a big photograph and one heading, and then the rest of the story was on page 3. And that heading, or the headline read that Big Larry, a Spanish professor personally involved with the controversy surrounding administrative hiring practices, condemned President Radley at the SA Senate meeting last night. Right, so capturing some breaking news in terms of being published on a Thursday and having the SA meetings before. So when I was thinking, in terms of kind of going linearly through what you asked for, that heading at first I was like, oh, he's involved with the decisions, but really what it came down to in reading this story, so much like Woody said, like it kind of changed what I thought from the heading. Basically, he was a professor in the Spanish department, but in terms of like a transcript audit, didn't have the requisite numbers of graduate level credits to teach Spanish. So he had like 12 hours on his transcript, and the article states that based on guidelines, it says that the number of hours required to teach in a public school is 24. So he had half the hours, but they don't say where they got that information from. But really what the rest of the article focused on was President Radley basically pulled him and assigned a new professor who was mentioned as Russian. So I didn't know how relevant that was. But then they interview like the former chair, and it's more of like, hey, this administration is making these decisions. They're not really consulting. We don't know why you would have interfered in this and replaced without, following what our typical procedures are. And they identify that. And, really what it comes down to is then they bring up a little bit more from the meeting at SA. So they're almost doing like 2 stories at once. And in there that there was an off-campus senator, Don Ritchie, who organized a committee to impeach the president and brought up other things that was going on with Radley at the time. And then they kind of end the article not about this professor, but in terms of what was happening in the finance committee. And so an audience, it's like when I first read it, it felt very much like, well, that's identified for maybe faculty and maybe students, right? If this was a beloved professor, maybe that's why he also was at the SA meeting, kind of talked through this. But it was one that kind of like what he saw, it feels really different than what I see in the Oswegonian today. There aren't really here's what was happening, even just in the here's what was happening at SA. That wasn't there. And then also straight up having people call for a president's resignation. So I do think that there is some some relevancy today. Please don't read into the exact sentence following that. But in terms of reporting on what's happening at SA and that transparency and, what happens in there, there have been a couple instances in the last like 10 years where it's like, hey, this is what might be happening in administration, but there isn't a lot of the stories that I've seen like that today. So I found that really fascinating to see the SA coverage, but also have this like awareness of like, well, professors are supposed to have criteria and like, there's these hiring things and kind of talking about it and seeking out interviews from, faculty as well. That was really fascinating.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea, for sharing. And it provides an opportunity for students to sort of ask those questions about if they don't know a particular process or who these positions are, or whatever it is. It provides a new way for them to sort of explore more as part of the assignment. So we are kind of pretty much at time. Let me get back here. I need to get back here and back to sharing the screen. And so we'll do a very quick wrap up here. Questions that we think about are things like, how does this activity support a classroom assignment? How does this activity assist students with information literacy and research skills? And then are there ways to improve this activity? So if there's a professor who's kind of thinking about these things that want to include archives and special collections in the classroom, highly encourage you to reach out to us to be able to sort of work through that process. As Linda mentioned, it can take a lot of time. So yeah. I would recommend, if you're thinking about something, to think at least a semester ahead. So if you're thinking about if you're thinking right now, hopefully you're thinking at the spring semester and not the fall semester, we can work with you with that, but we can really dial things in if it's going to be sort of that semester beyond what's coming up here. And then, just as a super quick conclusion, there are various ways to use special collections for classes. And, we're very willing, Lyn, for, providing any suggestions or guidance on how that, on the classroom side, how assignments can be created, how that they can be achieve class objectives, things like that. And for myself, being able to work with you to try to find objects that fit within what you're looking to do in the classroom.
Right. So I would also add just that my Women in History project, actually, I shared with a colleague of mine who was teaching a class on the 1970s, and she took the core idea of using the newspapers and the newspapers and the yearbooks to adapt it to her assignment. So I was really happy to share that, and I was actually happy to see how she sort of transformed that assignment to fit her needs and her objectives and to connect students with her class in a very different way. So it actually helps to share this information. So I hope this session was useful for you. Please reach out to Zach. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for attending today.
Thank you.